All right, welcome back to Burn the Louvre. We are going to look at Season 1, Episode 2 of Yellowjackets. I want to continue with this idea of just questioning what it is that makes us interested in something and sort of interrogating that, not being afraid to pitch other things and get in there and sort of get our hands dirty. But if we're doing it in the context of trying to become a better writer, there's a few things that I think we should put front and center. Because we just know they've been tested over time and we know they are important as far as storytelling goes, important tools to use. The first thing, and I've had great teachers that I've been lucky enough to learn these from. For one, we want to talk about things in terms of sequences. So breaking the story down into little smaller stories, basically. Something like this show is perfect for looking at sequences because there's so many different characters. So it seems more complicated because we're cutting between different stories. But if you line all of Shauna's scenes together, all of Thais', you'll see that usually people only get like 3 or 4 scenes to tell a story, and the story becomes a lot simpler and easier to analyze. And that's probably how it was written also. They're not going back and forth, in their minds. They're writing someone's arc, and then they're going to the next one, and then putting it together as they see fit. We also want to talk about something, a pattern you'll see in the sequences. You'll see at every level, which is a setup, a build, and a payoff. Some of the teachers that I know will come up a lot. There's Corey Mandel, who teaches classes online, and I would recommend to anyone. Also, Tolton Wingate and some other Corey students, I guess, sort of broke off and started their own thing as well. Those classes are great. But those folks talk about, I believe their term is crisis, but they talk about something that comes before the setup, build, and payoff. So it's a 4-part thing. There's also, you'll see a lot of people just talk about setup and payoff. There's a producer, Jason Kyle, who I remember describing story as essentially put your character in a tree and then throw rocks at them. So you could sort of say that's the setup and the build, with the payoff being more of an implied thing. So different people have different ways. I'm sure there's a bunch of teachers with different terminology. I'm going to use the phrase setup, build, payoff because that just is what sticks in my mind, but I want to definitely recognize the importance of, there is often a thing that comes before that. Sometimes it's specifically a scene that's going to make up a 4-scene sequence, or sometimes it's just knowledge we have from the previous episode, but it's very important to be aware of what I'm going to say is like background leading into the setup. That gives us what we need to know in order to know why. It helps us know why it's important when the thing launches. We'll get into more, but also we're just going to see a lot of conflict. It's such a basic part of storytelling. I can't even get into, or partially because I don't know all the reasons, but it's so fundamental that it's almost less important to get into it. We're just, conflict is going to competing goals. That's going to drive so much of storytelling at different levels. But let's get started. Oh, hello. So it turns out that just because you think something is fair use, that doesn't mean the copyright holders will agree with you. And it also turns out that giant media conglomerates that employ people specifically to find copyrighted uses of their material, they're not super chill about that. So we're going to try this a different way. We're going to record it again. But here's the good news. This is one of those things where something bad happens to someone and then they're like, actually it was the best thing that ever happened to me. And I'm always like, nah, I think that's bullshit. I think you would do it the easy way if you had a chance again. And those are not mutually exclusive things. I have learned something that I would like to apply here. I probably would take the option just keeping the first thing I recorded if that were the case. But I have never been accused of making good decisions. So, the first, when I talk about the setup, build, payoff, and then the thing that precedes it, I never had a super strong grasp on that concept. So I felt with that like I hadn't internalized it to the extent where I could really express it in my own way, and I felt kind of like I was just taking someone else's thing, which I don't want to do. But I've been thinking about it, and here's my different take on it. I spent 4 years studying psychology, and this is probably the closest to like a tangible use of that that there's been. But there was something, there's something called the Kuleshov effect, something like that. They did these experiments, this is over 100 years ago, when film was just starting, where they showed an actor like reacting to something, giving facial expressions. And then they would change the image that they showed beforehand. And they found that people would interpret the reactions differently depending on what was shown before. So, we have this sort of inherent drive to create a narrative out of what we're shown, or just in general. But I would argue it's even stronger in something like TV or film, because we as the audience never totally lose sight of the fact that there's someone directing the information that's shown to us. So we are constructing stories in our mind anyway, and it's enhanced by the fact we also know someone is curating what we're seeing. And so we're also trying to anticipate what they want us to take from these images. So that is how I'm going to think of this first part of a sequence. We'll call it like the Kuleshov primer. And I'm trademarking that. And if Paramount uses it, I'm coming after him. All right, so we start here. First scene is we're back right into the crash. We're going to focus in on Misty. This episode's going to have a lot of Misty. And it's going to start off with this scene of her getting a phone call. Now, this is something they only do a couple times, but this is like a different timeline. This is a few years prior. This is, I believe, 1992. And they do this with Natalie, at least, maybe someone else at some point. But they show them in the plane crashing and then have an even further flashback. And this is like the launch, the crisis scene, the background, or what I would say, this is like our Kuleshov primer. Because this is specifically there in order to show us how to feel about the rest of her story. So she gets this, basically a prank call from people. In it, it's going to have its own sort of setup, build, payoff. There's always a rhythm to things. It needs to be going forward. So they're going to make fun of her, saying she fucked some kid in the janitor's closet. She'll counter with, I've never even been in the janitor's closet. And then they say, oh, yeah, but you did it somewhere else, right? And then eventually it gets to a point where she gives some quote from Plato or someone about ignorance. And, like, there's this sort of pause in this triumphant moment. It reaches a peak where she feels she's bested them, but then they overcome this offer of hers ultimately by just laughing at her and saying, you're so weird. So it has a greater impact because she strives to fight them in this conflict, and she gives her best shot. It feels for a brief second like she's won, but ultimately it doesn't matter what she does because she's weird. She's not accepted by these people. And that's when, so that's the payoff, basically. And the scene in terms of the greater thing, this is our Kuleshov primer, okay? So now we are going to go forward back to the airplane crash. We're going to see Misty begin for the first time to sort of take control of the situation. She's the one we see first go to the door and open it. And then we have this other thing that's very... I love this little conundrum here. Just to move away from Misty for a second, we have Shauna going to try and free Van. She's trapped with the flames approaching, and Jackie is going to pull Shauna away, saying we can't help her, it's too dangerous. I love this dilemma they've set up. I think it's so smart because to me the basic way to do something like this, if you had this idea, would be to have someone try to get her out and then save themselves, basically. So in this situation, it'd be Jackie tries to get her out, but then she decides, I've got to save myself, and she leaves before Van escapes. I think it's so much more interesting that Jackie pulls Shauna away because, for one, it's, I think, whether it's fair or not, logically, we're always going to allow, if someone's saving themselves, that's something that we can kind of understand or sort of relate to better. The fact that she's pulling someone else away, so even though Shauna's her friend, these are both other people, right? So I think it psychologically, it feels more impactful that she's making a choice of Shauna versus Van as opposed to herself versus Van. It also is reinforcing her relationship with Shauna because it feels a little bit, again, she does love her and wants to protect her. That's all true. But there's a bit of like an ownership thing. It almost feels like she thinks her stuff is more important than Van, and Shauna is like hers to save. But Van does end up escaping. We find later they come across her. She's like, surprise. And then this is contributing to this overall arc we talked about Jackie is going to go from... They make a point of saying she's the leader. She has influence in the first episode. And she sort of represents the old world. And as soon as we land, we start moving away from that. She's going to have a lot of ideas in this episode that are not well received. And that's just going to sort of continue. She's stuck in old ways of thinking. She doesn't adapt like the rest do. So they get out. Now, catching back up with Misty. This is where she really takes off. So she sort of started to take charge for the first time by opening that door, but it really starts when we hear the coach. He's stuck under the plane. His leg is near gone. So she gets everyone together. She starts commanding them forcefully. She makes them lift it off of him. They see his leg there. Yeah, that's amazing. She goes and gets an axe. She chops off what remains of his leg. This is something that needs to be done. She knows what needs to be done. She's not afraid to do gross or hard things. And that's how she's going to start gaining status within this society. So remember, we're seeing it all in the perspective of she's weird, nobody likes her, despite her like knowledge of esoteric concepts. But here, immediately, she knows the most about medicine, and she is quickly skyrocketing in terms of importance. So she severs what's left of the leg, and she says, help me move him. So now we've launched this idea of Misty is going to be feeling valued for the first time, and she's going to do things to maintain that status. So now we have a scene. I don't know, I try to just watch these shows and just enjoy them the first time I watch them, not think about things too much. So I don't know exactly how they use the past timeline in relation to the present. I think they don't make a super big deal about making sure that all fits, but in general, at least when it works out that way, they will tell parallel stories to emphasize a certain point. And that is clearly, definitely what they're doing in this episode with Misty's two storylines. Now we're back in 2021. We still have this remaining thing from before about the phone call, but this is what I would call the crisis or primer scene in her 4-scene 2021 arc. So it's basically reinforcing this idea we've already had, in which she, although it is slightly different, because normally when Misty takes charge of, or when Misty wants something from a situation, she seems to do it by having control over it, whereas this feels a little different, although she's still 100% in control of everything that's happening. But she's on this date with this guy who's not interested in her at all. Her goal within this scene is going to be to keep the date going. So there's going to be a setup, build, and payoff within this individual launch scene, this primer scene. She's going to talk about her turn-ons. He barely gives her anything. He says, I don't know, hair. She's like, oh, I can work with that. Someone comes by to get drinks. He's going to try and say, we don't want any drinks. She's going to counter and get him to say they'll have the drinks. He doesn't want to have dinner. She makes him feel guilty, so then he says, okay, we'll have the dinner. And then the payoff is they get to continue with the date. But he's not interested at all. She's not worried that he's not interested. She just has something she wants from him, and she's going to manipulate the situation to get what she wants out of it. But clearly she's still desperate. That's very important. Now, we're building on this idea. Misty is taking care of him. Now she's recruited other people and is informing them. She's instructing them on what to do. She's telling them to make bandages. They'll have to change Coach Scott's bandages every hour. I don't know who this person is over there. I don't think they are in the show. But anyway. She comes over. Now she's helping with Travis's wound. So now she's expanded even beyond Coach Scott, although he's going to certainly be what we latch on to as sort of what we're funneling this overall concept of her being important through. But she is extending it to general medical things. She's becoming useful beyond just Coach Scott. We have this little conflict. Oh, yes, and now we have another build where she says we need to de-germ. What's the word? Sanitize. It's still not the right word, but it's close to that. We need to sanitize the wound, disinfect. So, of course, nothing ever happens immediately. There's always got to be little things along the way where it's a person arguing with you or just the world not offering it immediately. Everything is always little difficulties along the way. That, again, so I want to examine why things work, but I want to remind us that it's more important that they do work. But briefly, I'll say I think that we seem to have something that this just holds our interest. I think it holds our interest from moment to moment. We like tiny little conflicts or goal challenges along the way. And also, quite frankly, it stretches out the material. If everything happened immediately, it would be a lot harder to write an hour show. So they don't have, rubbing alcohol just on hand. So first they look for alcohol, maybe on the bar cart. Lonnie says that it was just soft drinks. It's cheaper to not have a bar cart on. So they're like, okay, we need something. How about Natalie? I bet you brought contraband. She says, yes, I did, but my backpack's on the plane. And then they find this, I think it's like facial toner or something that Jackie has in her bag. They're like, okay, this could work. But also we get to reinforce this other storyline that is happening in these scenes of Jackie not getting up to speed with things, and also specifically Van versus Jackie, because Van survived, so obviously she's a little annoyed with Jackie for pulling Shauna away and leaving her to die. So initially Van says, oh, how about this? I found this. And Jackie's like, oh, that's mine. And then realizes, oh, that doesn't fucking matter here. Like, that's so unimportant compared to the fact they're trying to save this guy's life. The fact that someone's using your toner. But again, we're continuing with that aspect of the story as well. We have a little thing, a little conflict. I don't know if this is just to put one more thing in the way, throw one more rock at the tree, so to speak. I don't know specifically what to say about it, but there's this little conflict where Misty's about to explain to the coach what's going on, and then Thaisa is like, we can't tell him, it'll freak him out. So they sort of lie to him and they say, your leg's okay. That, I mean, in addition to me not understanding specifically what they're saying, it also is obviously not a realistic approach, because if we put ourselves in this situation in reality, we realize, well, he's going to realize his leg is gone. It's not going to take that long. But anyway, Thaisa triumphs in this little altercation thing. Maybe it just serves the purpose of delaying the coach's reaction. So it allows us to have that be more of an impactful thing when it eventually happens, in terms of the story. Okay, Shauna. Modern Shauna 2021. We're going to have two... Again, when we put all the storyline, all the scenes back to back, not in the way they're presented to us, but if we chop it up and put everything together within a single story, Shauna's story, Misty's story, etc., these stories become very simple. Shauna, I would say, has two main goals throughout her sequences. One is to make dinner, and two is to have sex with her husband. So in this first one, she is driving. She realizes she forgot to take the meat. So you also, you can fill up so much just by thinking, okay, we have a problem. In reality, what would I go through with this problem? I have to make dinner. I gotta defrost the meat. It's that simple. Like, it sounds so uninteresting, but in this context, they make it interesting. I mean, arguably, I like the show. You don't have to. But she calls her daughter. So we also, every sort of obstacle is an opportunity to showcase something about the character. So we're also reinforcing this sort of snipey relationship between her and the daughter, her teenage daughter, who gives resistance to the idea of getting the meat out of the freezer, and it's going to, which feels totally organic, but when I'm saying it like that, it sounds ridiculous. Like, why would she not just pull the fucking meat out of the freezer? But they do it in a believable way. Mostly she's just reluctant to do anything her mom is asking her to do. And then Shauna's going to get into this accident. So they exchange information. This is the introduction of this Adam character who she will eventually have an affair with. And we're going to start building that intrigue here. So I want to quickly talk about questions. I'm not going to... I don't know that there's a specific question launched here, but the story is sort of based around mystery and questions as like a central driving force. That's sort of how everything is framed. And when you've successfully built that atmosphere, the audience starts to do some of the work for you. So for instance, there's nothing on paper about how we should suspect him. I remember watching this, and he immediately likes her a lot and gives her his number. I mean, it's very flirtatious the way he responds to this fender bender. And I remember immediately being distrustful of him and wondering, oh, is he going to be involved with this ransom or blackmail, whatever. So that actually does come back in the sense that she, in a very tangible way, does start to suspect him much, much later on. But also, the end result is that he wasn't doing any of that. But it still drove my interest along the way. So we've created just this sort of like, what's going on, anticipatory, who's going to be doing something shady feeling. And now in my mind, as I'm watching, I'm creating extra intrigue that sometimes they might not even have thought of. So that's not the case here, but. So he gives her the number. Now the next scene is this great scene of this is where we give the setup for her goal to have sex with him. So I would say the background is just, or the reason why this goal is important is because they love each other. They're married and she wants the relationship to work out. That's important to her. The specific goal, she tells them to do some sort of fantasy, like role play scenario. So that's going to be probably her biggest goal throughout her 2021 storyline in this episode. Okay, now we have Misty getting back to her house with the guy. I would say it's a new scene, but it's basically just a continuation of the background scene. She's going to now try to take the date inside, whereas he's going to try and drop her off and leave. There's going to be a build of that. She's going to make him feel guilty, and he's going to come inside. When they get inside, they're going to find Natalie. Natalie has a gun. And the guy immediately leaves. Misty doesn't care at all. So that we're done with that now. That existed purely to remind us she's still desperate. Natalie suspects that Misty had something to do with the cards that were sent out. So Natalie's goal is to figure out what's going on with the cards. Misty's gonna counter by saying, I got one too. Natalie says, well, how do I know you didn't send it to yourself? And Misty says, well, I could ask you the same thing. So it's a stalemate. We basically have to trust each other And then this is going to set up Misty's goal for the rest of this episode and beyond, which is just to hang out with Natalie, is how I would put it. So Misty does also, she shows that she has already done more research than Natalie. So that makes her valuable. She has all these like detective skills. It also shows that she does care about this, but I don't think that's the driving force here. I think she just cares about being with Natalie, whereas Natalie cares about the actual answer to the question, who sent these out, and to a lesser extent, why. So what's interesting is we're going to stay with these two characters in this timeline, but we're going to switch scenes to the bar. And I think that reinforces the importance of this idea of the structured sequence. I would say that's the setup. This is a build for Misty's goal of hanging out with Natalie. So it does give us a sense, by changing locations, that in itself does give us a sense of a trajectory of moving forward. I guess sort of similar to the Kuleshov thing. I think at this point the audience subconsciously, or in this case consciously because we're examining it, but at the very least subconsciously expects a certain arc to the story, and changing scenes gives us that. The one thing that we have here that like would be hard to have happen at our house is we introduce the character Kevin, her old goth friend who's now a detective. But we could have found a different way to do that. It's not super important that they go to a bar for that to happen. So the default way to have this conversation continue, if you're writing this, probably would be to have them stay at the house. But this is important that they are moving things forward. So Misty's going to reveal a bunch of context about what it is to be a citizen detective. So she's basically arguing, again, we are advancing in terms of plot. We're moving towards finding who sent these out, but probably more importantly, she's arguing to Natalie why she is useful. And also, we're giving the context because it's going to come up a bunch. This whole citizen detective idea is going to be a big thing later on. Natalie, so this scene is a bit confusing. The information's all there, but I remember this was the one time where I got confused to the point where for a couple scenes, I really didn't know what was going on, and that's I believe at least one way that could be addressed is with a different structure to this. I think for one thing, she just starts picking stuff up, and we see it visually as the introduction, and then they start talking about it. Like she picks this up and says, "Who's this reporter?" That's a little harder to follow that flow of information than something like Misty saying, "Have you heard about this reporter?" and she hands her the card. Now, it's always a give and take. That example I just came up with off the top of my head is less organic. Maybe it's maybe just not as good, but what it does is it frames the information for us. It felt like we were doing a lot of catch up here with all the visual information, but the thing that I got lost on was she's going to come across Travis's driver's license. Now at this point, I guess it's obvious that it's the one guy who's in the past with them, or one of a couple that are left. But structurally, it gets confusing because Natalie, as soon as she finds Travis's ID with his phone number that Misty has tracked down, her goal completely changes. And they don't make it super clear. In general, you don't want your characters to suddenly abandon a goal, because it shows us that it signals to us that it was never that important in the first place, and it's also just hard to follow. You could use it to show how important the new goal is, but you got to be carefully, you got to make sure to frame it that way. So this scene is going to end with Natalie just walking off, and it's a very awkward thing where it just sort of peters out, and I didn't know what was happening. They could have added, again, these are just examples that might not necessarily be better, but this is like the approach you want to start taking. If Misty just said something like, "Where are you going? We're in the middle of this," or, "Hey, don't you care about these postcards anymore?" It's showing to us that Natalie has, it's emphasizing the fact that this must be important because she's given up on this other thing that she used to think was important. But there's a lot of weird, I feel like this is a weird scene in general. There's also this thing where she is very not interested when Kevin comes up. Natalie's not interested in him, even though he's very interested in her. I think maybe that was supposed to show us that how focused on Travis she is, but that didn't come across to me. So basically this is going to, in terms of Misty's storyline, this is a build, and it looks like she has reached her goal. Natalie's with her, and now she's going to fail and have to find something else because she accidentally gave Natalie something she was more interested in than the postcards, and Natalie's just going to physically, literally just leave. So now Misty has a new thing to overcome in terms of hanging out with her. Now here, the 1996 timelines, they're less structured. Interestingly, I like them a lot more. Generally, when someone says, they wrote something because like they just care so much about the characters and they don't care about the structure and stuff. And generally, I find those type of things, they come across as boring and self-indulgent. It is something that made me want to look at this, especially because I did like these 1996 scenes so much. But it is true that there is less structure going on. I would, if I had to come up with a way to frame this sort of sequence, I would say there's a sequence with Travis being separate from the group and Natalie trying to pull him into the group in various ways. So this scene, Javi is looking for their dad, Javi being Travis's brother, their dad being the coach who is dead. Natalie tries to recruit Travis to help get his brother off the plane, and Travis is basically like, "Fuck off, don't tell me what to do." Okay, now, and we are gonna have 4 scenes where it touches on that, but it's not like a clear arc. It's more enforcing the same thing. Much like with Jackie, the strongest thing in this trend is that she pulled Shauna away, but we're gonna have little other things that are enforcing the same idea, that she is not a skilled leader anymore. She's the old way. They're all adapting to the new way of looking at things. Thaisa, there's 2 main scenes here. I don't know how to fit it into a specific sequence, but the main thing this scene is going to do is, well, for one, it's going to reinforce the central sort of struggle she's going through, which is time with her campaign versus time with her family. That's going to be a big thing. This scene, so she missed the kids' parent-teacher day, and she's going to have sort of an argument with her wife around it. It's interesting because I like this scene, but in terms of structure, it's not something I'd recommend because it's not a capital C conflict. It feels like a conflict because they're arguing, but neither of them has a specific goal. It is more realistic than a normal scene, but that's not necessarily what you want. But it is very real in that neither has a specific goal. They're talking about something that happened in the past. So in general, you want to be aware of that as something that you often should avoid, because it's just not as urgent as impending. The stakes aren't as high as something that hasn't happened yet or is about to happen. But it is interesting the way that, so they're basically talking about two things at once. They're talking about the campaign, and they're talking about how Sammy, the kid, is having trouble making friends, and he might be kind of weird. They wrap it up in a way that, if it was just two real people talking, I would say this is a very clever trick that Thaisa does. In this context, I would just say it's a very clever way they wrote it, which is Simone wants to talk, the wife wants to talk about Sammy having trouble. Thaisa says, maybe we should have taken him out of public school. And the wife says, no, you were right. Education is central to your campaign. We can't be the ones who don't send our kids to public school. And we're fighting for something together. So basically, Thaisa she doesn't overcome the idea that she missed the parent-teacher conference, that happened, but she manages to turn the conversation back into the campaign, and sort of they reach a conclusion that way. But at the end of the scene, it launches this idea basically of, is something weird going on with Sammy? And it is done, I like it, but you could argue it's a very manipulative way, because it's not done with any real action that he's taking. It's done just with the camera and the sound and the editing and direction and performance. All it does basically is make this scary sound and sort of zoom in on him in a way that it's very clearly signaling to us we are supposed to be worrying about him. Is something creepy going on with him? But there's nothing really in the scene to support that. We just know he's having trouble making friends. But even that is not in the scene. They're just talking about it. He is holding a doll that's kind of creepy. Okay, now we're going to build Shauna's goal to have sex with Jeff in this specific role-play fantasy way. It's not going to work out. She's too, embarrassed, basically. She can't allow just the emotions and the impetus of the act to take over. She's too in her head to play this role, and she feels too silly about it. It ends up turning into kind of a fight, and he storms off. He gives the great line, I'm just going to go jerk off and watch Sports Center, which is just the saddest of lines. Also, he's going to find Adam's number written on her arm, so he feels it builds, and then it reaches an apex when he realizes she hasn't even told him that she got into an accident. Now, we as the audience are also a little worried. It feels like he's caught her in something because we know they had sort of a flirtatious thing and he wrote his number on her arm. But Jeff doesn't even register in that sense here. But it is adding something extra for our experience of it, because at first we're worried that that's going to be what he latches onto, is a jealousy thing. So she fails her goal to have sex with him. She's going to have to come up with something different. Okay, so now Jackie is explaining her reasoning to Shauna. Here we get a super, super quick. So everything is better if it's, even if there's not a build, if it's just setup and payoff. You want some instance of, even if we don't understand it at the time, it just feels so much more organic if you've introduced a piece of information earlier. So we're going to get a shot. It's just like 2 seconds long of Lottie freaking out looking for her luggage. We're going to move on. But later, when she finds the luggage, it's going to be more important. This is such a great little thing with Laura Lee. Here we're going to find the coach up in the tree. Now, if you watch it, and you should go back and watch this, it's so good. There's a setup, build, and payoff within this tiny piece of the scene that I think is so effective. We want to introduce this thing with the coach in as dramatic as a way possible. We use suspense to build that. So what they could do is just have her walking and she sees the coach up in the tree. That might be your first idea if you're writing. But then you have to think, okay, how can I structure this in a way to give the maximum impact? So what happens here is she finds her teddy bear, who I would say the teddy bear is contributing even more to it because it's like the most innocent thing you could find. She's holding it, and then what appears to be a drop of blood falls on it. And then she looks up, and then a drop of blood lands on her. So we've built this question. What the hell is happening? Is something dripping blood on her? Then we pan up, slowly building the suspense, and then she sees it, but we haven't seen it yet. We're just looking at her, and she starts to scream. So now we know clearly there's something horrific up there. There's this huge question in our minds without anyone having to say what's up there in the literal sense. That question, there's no ambiguity about what they want us to be thinking about here. And then we're going to finally get to the top, and the music's going to build suspense as well. And we see the coach, like impaled on this piece of the tree up there. Now, once again, Travis mentioned earlier briefly that he fell out of the plane. So this is sort of a payoff to that little thing. I don't know that, again, you're always, there's a, there's a give and take, something you gain, something you lose with every decision. This seems to make it a little less surprising because we weren't actively wondering where is the coach. I think instead of him saying he fell out, it might be more interesting if Javi was looking around for the dad. Well, I guess that is what he was doing. That's exactly what he was doing. But Travis told us that he fell out of the plane. So, I don't know. But anyway, just something to think about. But I guess they just decided overall that was the best way to present it. They gave us the idea that he fell out of the plane, and now we see this. I feel like the ideal thing would be, although this would be dumb, if there was some way for him to be like, I think he may have fallen out. I don't know. We'll keep moving. So now we're going to have another thing. Again, the metaphor of throwing rocks at Jackie in the tree is quite literal here, almost. And that they're going to say, what do we do with him? Jackie's going to suggest throwing rocks at him, and they all say that's stupid. Or actually, she suggests throwing shoes at him. But what's going to happen here is Travis, he's separate from them. They're all trying to come up with something smart. and Travis is going to see him and just start climbing the tree. So we still have this idea of him separate from the group. But how do we show that something's important to someone? Perhaps the main way is to show them pursuing a goal. And we put obstacles in their way. Again, this is another use for the obstacles. And why nothing just happens easily. Because that's how we tell the audience that this is important to them. You know something, you know that it's important that his dad is dead to him because we see him risking his life. So he gets up there, he goes to try and get him down. The branch is going to fall and Travis almost dies, but he goes back at the last minute and grabs onto the tree before the branch falls. There's also a little thing with Misty once again, thinking quickly. It's probably not enough, but it's definitely the best idea they can do with the time they have. She grabs a bunch of, I don't know if they're sweatshirts or different cloth type things, and she makes a makeshift net in case Travis should fall. Which doesn't happen, but it's just reinforcing that. So the coach falls. But this idea of Travis suffering trauma is really strongly put into our minds because we saw him risk his life to go after the dad, who was clearly going to be dead anyway. Okay, now we have Thaisa. She's going to go. The wife comes in here and says, Sammy wants you to read to him. There's this little exchange that I did not remember happening till I rewatched it, and I would argue I think it's not a coincidence that I didn't remember this. I think it's also not structured in a way where the information comes out organically. So I think my brain wasn't primed to take this in. So it didn't have, I think of it as like a coat rack, and the information are the coats. You need to build the coat rack in order to put the coats on and have them stay. Anyway, she's going to quickly say, tell me he's open to shades. And the wife says, no, he's still not. It's dark. It's like Dracula's crypt in there or something. It's just this offhand thing, but because it's not like motivated dialogue, I didn't notice it. But what they're trying to do with it is build this idea of Sammy being creepy. So her goal to come into it is to read to him, but she quickly abandons that, but not in a bad way like I was saying with Natalie earlier. It's very organic. It's clear that her real goal in this scene is to make him feel better, because as soon as he doesn't want to read, she says, it's sort of like a, well, what's going on situation. And she tries various things to make him feel better. It doesn't work. It builds. She ends up doing these shadow puppets, which is working until she has a vision of a wolf when she's trying to make a wolf shadow puppet. And it scares her. So the interesting thing is with scary stuff, so much of it is the vibes that... well, what they're doing is they're kind of cheating here, because the idea that she hallucinates a wolf, there's nothing to connect that to Sammy. We never suspect him of being psychic or, whatever telepathy type ability it would be for him to like put these images in her mind. But it is contributing to the overall atmosphere of creepiness, perhaps supernatural type stuff. But also in a tangible way, which we don't learn till much later, is it is actually a seed that they're planting that nothing is really going on with Sammy. It's actually Thaisa that's going crazy. And we'll come to that later. she finds these creepy drawings that he's done. He's blocking out. So this is very effective. This is not in the same way I would say it's sort of, not in a bad way, but cheating with the other things. This is a very creepy, like, tangible thing to latch onto. And she's like, why are you blocking out the light? And he says, because of the lady in the tree. She stares at me. I put this up so she can't see me. Which is a very creepy idea. Tysa gets kind of mad. She's like, explain it. And he's like, I did. That's what it is. Fucking lady in the tree. But then they do, the last beat is, again, so with a TV show that relies a lot on questions, a lot of the questions are going to be more interesting than the answers. It's just, that's not ideal, but it's also important to recognize that's just how it's going to be. It's much harder to come up with a super satisfying answer that fits in with all the story elements than it is to launch a question. So it's okay. But they're going to cheat again with the last beat. She says, talk to me. He's like, I just told you. And then she says, Sammy. And then he goes, Sammy, Sammy, Sammy. And then they cut away. So if we look at this again, having watched it, we know Sammy isn't actually the disturbed one. You might ask, why would a kid do it? It's just a weird, creepy thing to do if he's not actually insane. Probably wouldn't do that, but okay, so now this is gonna, so the simple stories, we build around them, but that provides like the basic structure. So it sounds silly to be like her goal is to make dinner, but that is how they're framing things, and they're building the interesting stuff around it. So she's going to get a call from Adam here, but first she sees that Callie, her daughter, did not take the meat out of the fridge. So this is, a rock being thrown at her in the tree of making dinner. Adam is going to invite her to dinner, and it sounds silly because that's a natural thing to ask someone to do on a date, but I don't think it's a coincidence that it's dinner and she's trying to make dinner. He's escalating against her goal of making dinner. The character isn't consciously doing that, but in terms of the story, the way they're presenting it to us, that is what they're doing. She is very tempted, but now it seems inappropriate. She's not going to. And he's going to say, I thought you were someone who didn't play by the rules. So it isn't enough to get her to abandon this goal and go have dinner with him, but it does sort of awaken something in her. We see that means something to her. After she hangs up, she's going to go stare at the frozen meat. She's going to think about what he said to her. She sees a rabbit in the garden, and she's going to have an offer against this, the world pushing back on her plans to make dinner. She's now going to kill a rabbit and make the dinner with that. We get a quick scene of them carrying the coach, but I think the main thing we see here is Natalie offers a drink to Travis. So she's we see her trying to get him to come around. We see her feeling bad for him. We see he takes the drink, so we see an instance of her successfully pulling him into the group, so to speak. And it's not a coincidence that she does it with alcohol, because they're both going to have substance abuse things. And that's going to be, this is where this sort of vague story they're telling with Natalie and Travis in the past, it's going to cut right to Natalie now. And that is clearly, it is effective. They're putting these together because it's clear that they're framing it. Well, we'll see where we cut to. So it's her having this scene where she's drinking, and there's not much dialogue in this scene, but it's very effective nonetheless. It's clear that she is thinking about Travis, and it's a very emotional thing. She's looking at his phone number, trying to get up the courage to call him. You just get the sense that there's a lot of history between them. So she has this goal, this new goal, after she's abandoned the goal of figuring out what the postcards are about. Now this is where I started to understand again, the first time I was watching it. So it was only unclear for a little while what was going on. The thing I didn't mention is it also seemed like the guy with the license, because I didn't know exactly who Travis was, it seemed like maybe he was a suspect, which I guess technically they're all suspects in who sent the postcards, but anyway. Now we're back up to speed. She's going to call him. He's going to say, you have the wrong number. So this is a build of her goal to get a hold of Travis. He shuts her down. She does not overcome this. Now, technically, she could just call back again, but in terms of the story, we say that attempt is done. She's going to have to come up with something different if she wants to get a hold of Travis. Now we have them at dinner. So this is, I would say, a payoff of the goal of making dinner. The family loves this chili that she made with rabbit. She has a funny thing. She tells them it's rabbit, and they just think she's joking, and she doesn't correct them. And you see that like weird secret, she likes that, which I think is important to her character. So in addition to liking the idea of the fact that she killed a rabbit and the fact that she doesn't play by the rules, I think she also is a little excited by the idea that she has a secret. So that story is going to pay off, and it's also going to serve as a sort of build to her goal of having sex with Jeff, because you see something in her eyes sort of changing with this feeding the rabbit to her family, almost like it's turning her on. And I don't know if this specifically fits into a sequence, but there's this, just sort of strong image of them covering up the dead bodies with their Yellowjackets banner, sort of burying the past. We're going to get this thing of Lottie finding her luggage now. So again, this is more impactful just because our brain, we might not even consciously remember that we saw her looking for her luggage before, but it still serves as, it makes this payoff more important. And what's ultimately going to happen, the reason she's looking for her luggage is we see her pull out her pills, and she's only got a few left. So the message is clear. She's worried that her medication is running out. We have Jackie again not making the right decision with Van. So we see overall trends concentrated within a specific relationship. So Misty's overall thing is becoming useful to the group, but it's definitely centralized in her taking care of the coach. Jackie's overall thing is not being a successful leader, but it's in this episode very concentrated into her interactions with Van. So Van's eating corn nuts, and Jackie's like, maybe we should conserve some food. And Van is like, oh, you want to save the corn nuts? So anyway, let me see if this is the scene I think it, and okay, yeah. So now we have Shauna. We have a build. Again, she has a new offer to this relationship. Offer, so to speak. That's, she's going to come and try this again with Jeff, and it's going to go well now. So this is her overcome of the obstacle that she was too timid to get into it before. We see something has sort of been awoken. I guess how else, that must be a word, but it sounds weird. Awoken. Something has been awakened in her. We have this scene. This is really beautiful. It doesn't matter. I don't know what sort of specifically within a context of a sequence where it would fit in, but I love this scene. It starts with Laura Lee freaking out, and she is worried that she did something bad and God is punishing her. That's why they crashed. She reveals it's because she called her piano teacher a cunt. And there's all this tension that just breaks, and they all start laughing at how ridiculous the situation is. And it's this really, really beautiful scene. It's exactly the type of thing, and then they all start sharing like embarrassing things about themselves. It's exactly the type of thing in real life, late at night, telling these stories that would make you feel so much closer to other people. Letting your guard down, being able to laugh at what's weird about you. So it's a smart thing for a writer to do. You just have designed the type of scene that in real life would create connections, make people feel close. So obviously that's a good thing to do, to display, so the audience, in addition to the characters within the story getting closer, even more important is the audience is getting closer to them. We're along for this ride. And then we have Misty sneak off. Again, I'm not sure what to say about the fact that they didn't want her to tell him, but I guess it just is, it makes this more impactful and stretches it out in terms of the story. She's going to go say, hey, I cut off your leg. And then he's able to react here. So yeah, it is, I guess just in terms of a story, it makes sense. Because you don't want to have too many beats at once. And now she says, and now I need to cauterize your wound. And so everyone's going to think this is weird. So it's enforcing the idea that she is weird, but the weirdness is useful here because it is 100% what they should be doing. She heats up the axe and puts it against his wound to cauterize it and stop it from bleeding, which is exactly, as far as I know, that's medically a good idea. So this is a build of her story of becoming useful and doing so specifically through medicine. And now we get the payoff of Shauna's goal to have sex with Jeff. We see they just had sex. We see it was successful. So now it feels like, and again, it's a rise and fall, right? So the climax, no pun intended, the climax of that was they had sex. So she accomplished the goal. But there's a meaning behind the goal, right? The reason the goal is important is because she wants the relationship to work. And so the fact that she did all this work and the fact that she feels like she accomplished her goal, just like in the first scene when Misty feels like she one-upped the girls on the phone, and then she realizes none of that mattered. A similar thing is going to happen here. Everything's going great, and then she's going to see on his phone a text from a woman. So he's meeting a woman tomorrow, this woman Bianca. and her heart just sinks. After all that, I overcame this. But what's really important, the relationship, is jeopardized even more than I thought it was at the beginning of the episode. So that's the payoff here, and it's going to lead us into the next episode story. So now we have a scene with Misty. She goes off to pee in the woods. And this is sort of the climax of her becoming useful. We see, or she hears, they don't realize she's there. Some of the girls walk by, and she hears them specifically, explicitly say, wow, Misty, something to the effect of, Misty knows how to do so much stuff. We'd be screwed without her. In other words, she's useful. We like having her here. And you see the effect it has on Misty. She smiles really big. And then she notices something off screen, which is going to come back. But again, so we're going to have this. We're going to have a scene of her in the present, and then we're going to come back to Misty in 1996 again. Perhaps the natural first inclination thing to do would be to just finish up this scene here, but we are going to build suspense. Instead of her seeing the transmitter here, she's going to notice something. We're wondering, what did she notice? Then we cut away. Then we're going to come back. And now, again, we always have at least like a setup and a payoff, because that is just what people like. Also, it's important that we end on that scene, because these two payoffs in the two different timelines, they both are enforcing each other. They're telling a similar story. But the one in 1996 is even more egregious. So it's good to end on that. So you always want things to feel like they're escalating. Okay, so we've built, what did she see off to the side? Now we get Natalie. Natalie is pursuing her goal of getting to Travis. We had a build where she tried to call him, didn't work out. So now, how's she going to escalate, overcome that obstacle? She's going to say, I'm just fucking going to go drive. I have his address. It's a few hours away. I'm going to go drive and find him. But she runs into an obstacle again. Her car won't start. Misty pulls up in a very suspicious way and says, oh, your car won't start? Well, here, let's go together. I have an extra coffee for you. So it's all very clear we're supposed to be suspicious of Misty. Beyond suspicious. It's like we basically know she had something to do with the car not starting. So we have her modern storyline. So we had the Kuleshov primer, as I've called it, of her on this date with the guy and just wanting companionship desperately. We have a setup of, I'm going to be with Natalie, and the way I'm going to do that is by being useful as a citizen detective. We build that in the scene with the bar. She shows all the things she's learned already about the different Yellowjackets, how useful she is. But she's not going to be able to overcome the obstacle that ultimately Natalie's more interested in Travis than any of that. Natalie leaves. So how is Misty going to deal with that? She's going to say, okay, if your goal is Travis, I'm going to make sure I am necessary for your ability to go seek out Travis. So she sabotages the car. This is the payoff of that whole thing, and a launch of a new goal of the two of them driving to go see Travis. And then we get the final scene, which, again, these parallel each other very well. We see what it was that she saw, it was a transmitter. And earlier, it just looks like it says black box on it or something, but they specifically, and I mentioned you always have at least a setup and a payoff because it's dramatically good. It's also framing information. This is very clearly an example of that because it's just offhand mentioned around the campfire. There must be a transmitter that they can use to track us down. So that's been planted in our minds. Now we see this, and we might not think that the black box is a transmitter otherwise, but we're definitely thinking that because we just heard people talking about it. So she finds this electronic thing, a transmitter, and she smashes it. And it's a huge payoff to this thing of her being unwanted. She finds a way to be wanted. She feels accepted by people for the first time. And she is going to manipulate the situation in order to continue to be wanted in the most dramatic way by killing their chance of being rescued, of being tracked down and rescued. So everything else that's going to happen is really a result of this action that Misty just took. Godspeed.